Now I'm hoping everyone is seeing the Oak Ridge history, even more stories from the Secret City. And on that today, September the 30th. So let's get started. Again, very quickly, for anyone who is on here for the first time, I'm born in Middle Tennessee, married Fannie, my high school sweetheart. I'm a Vietnam veteran, been in Oak Ridge 50 years, not today, it was on the 14th of September. Historian for the National Security Complex, retired. Historian for the City of Oak Ridge, Commissioner for Tennessee Historical Commission, Elder at Highland View, and a chaplain for the police department. I promised you to watch the virtual tours of Building 9731 and Beta 3 at Y12. So we're going to start on that and watch those two videos. So Ann, I'm going to ask you to raise your hand if everything's going well when I turn this on and we can hear, everyone hears the audio and it's working. So let's give it a try. Thank you, Ann.
So these are the alpha units. Notice how large they are, much taller than the betas. This building, 9731, the pilot facility for the electromagnetic separation process. This was the first building completed on the site in 1943. The other buildings were being built, and as they were being built, they actually operated these Calutrons in this building. They started with this pilot facility, working out the kinks, and as they were developing the process, they were installing the other Calutrons. The word Calutron stands for California University Cyclotron, and it was invented by Ernest Lawrence. There were 1,152 of them here in Y12. So these are the alpha Calutrons. No moving parts, just two large magnets, and that magnetic field separates uranium-235 and 238. Centrifugal force will cause that 238, which has 3 neutrons more than the 235, to make a slightly larger arc than the 235. So you can catch that 235 up at the top of the arc. There are 2 stages. There are alpha stages, that's the first stage, and then there were beta stages, the second stage. In 1,000 pounds of uranium ore, there's only 7 pounds of uranium-235. The first part of the process is the most difficult, just getting that slight amount of uranium-235 to be a larger percentage of the output product. And they operated these. After the war ended, they shut the Calutrons down, except for those in this building, 9731, and over in Beta 3. Those Calutrons operated until 1998, separating all of the elements in the periodic table that have stable isotopes. And some of those isotopes, they were able to use by putting them into the graphite reactor to produce nuclear medicine, and other radioisotopes that were used in industry and research. The nuclear age that was introduced as a part of the Manhattan Project has resulted in nuclear power, has resulted in nuclear medicine, and tremendous technological advances that we take for granted. Even something as simple as the touch screen on your iPhone. That's origin was here in Oak Ridge. Many other examples of technological advances have come forth from the Manhattan Project.
Okay, now let's watch Beta 3 virtual tour, and then we'll stop and talk about them a little bit.
So Beta 3 is one of the 9 large buildings that were used to house the Calutrons. The Calutrons were located in the high level. So these are the Calutrons. Let me show you a little closer view. And notice the red line. That was to tell you if you had any metal in your pocket, you shouldn't get any closer than that because it might pull you right up against those large magnets. Remember, it's a batch process, so you've got one here, and the material goes into the bottom and comes out at the top. Now, it was one large racetrack of 36 calutrons during the Manhattan Project when they were separating uranium. But then after the war, when they started separating those stable isotopes, they didn't need all of that large racetrack. They needed smaller ones. So they put in shunts here. So now they have 4 smaller racetracks that they can use to separate different elements in each of the racetracks. And they did that until 1998, separating all of the elements in the periodic table here at these calutrons. Calutrons were used during the war to separate the uranium for little boy. But after the war, they would separate all of the elements in the periodic table. Some of them they would send over to the graphite reactor, make them radioactive, and something that started being separated in the calutron through another process would eventually produce cardiac scan medical isotope. So the exact same science, the exact same equipment that produced the uranium for little boy also produced these isotopes, stable isotopes, that were used as targets to produce nuclear medicine. So let me demonstrate how these calutron works. If you look here, the first thing you have is you heat up that material that's in the charge box, and then it's attracted out between those 2 magnets. And the magnets cause it to bend, and you get that arc that causes the material to separate by its mass and go into the collector up at the top. This is the control room where the young girls would have operated those calutrons. Actually, this one right here is Gladys Owens, and this is her picture when she came back later. She worked here from January till December of 1945, sitting on these stools, operating these cubicles, and separating that uranium. Now let's walk right down here. And remember, they were adjusting these knobs and watching these meters on each of these, one of the calutron girls at each location.
What was the stick used?
The stick, thank you, that's a good question. This is a grounding rod for when the maintenance people had to go in there and work on it. They'd go in and short out the high voltage capacitors before they actually went in and worked. So let me show you this plaque that was awarded to this building in recognition of its historical significance. The American Nuclear Society awarded it as a nuclear historic landmark in November of 2002.
All right, now I'm going to ask if there are any questions that you have about any of the that tour of those 2 buildings. I've suggested that you can unmute yourself and let's have a conversation about those 2 buildings. What are your thoughts?
What's uranium hexafluoride they use there as well?
How much power does one of these calutrons use?
During the Manhattan Project, when there were 1,152 of them, they did require a good bit of current to go through those magnets. While K25, when it came online in March of 1945, it was calculated back at that time, and my good friend Cameron Reed has actually researched this in quite a bit of detail. And he has proven the fact that in Colonel Nichols' book, The Race to Trinity, he said that that Oak Ridge, mostly Y12, but some of K25, was using 1/7 of all of the electricity produced in the nation. Now, that's just not accurate. It's more close to 1/7 of the electricity produced by the Tennessee Valley Authority. And it's also said that it was more than what would have been required to run the city of New York City. But a good bit of electricity was required. Of course, Norris Dam is one of the reasons that this area was selected as being a source of electricity. And the Fontana Dam was actually built exclusively to produce electricity for Oak Ridge. And so TVA was providing the electricity. Actually, after K25 got going and after they built all of the other gaseous diffusion buildings there, 6 in total, those electric motors consumed an enormous amount of electricity, more than was consumed during the Manhattan Project. So the electrical usage at K25 was higher than what it was at Y12 and just the K25 building during the Manhattan Project. Thank you for that question. Any other question?
Ray, this is Bob, and this is just a comment. When I first came to Oak Ridge as a co-op student in 1960, I was technically with Oak Ridge National Laboratory, but it was the Electronuclear Research Division, which was located primarily at Beta 3.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's nice to see Beta 3 again. What I was associated with was the design of the Oak Ridge isochronous cyclotron at that time.
Was that cyclotron located in Alpha 2?
No, that was the 86-inch cyclotron. There was another cyclotron in Beta 3 that was the 63-inch cyclotron, but they were already operating. This was the one that was built especially over at X10 in the 6000 building. That was the one that was being designed then.
I see. Okay. I knew that they had a cyclotron in Beta 3. In fact, there's some remains of it still there over on, I believe it's on the east racetrack that was used for the actinide facility. But I know also that there was that large one in Alpha 2, which is still there, but we will not be able to preserve it. I'm sure that the contamination level is going to be too much. But thanks for that comment. You have memories, I'm sure, of that building, and it still looks today very much like it did then, and we want to preserve that as a part of the Manhattan Project National Historical Park. So I think that's a very important aspect of our history to be preserved.
One of those cyclotrons was used to accelerate nuclear decay, which Alex Zucker did. Do you know anything about that?
Bob, you might be better able to answer that than me.
I think that actually the cyclotron in Beta 3 did some pioneering work in heavy ion nuclear physics because it was built to accelerate nitrogen-14 ions. Most cyclotrons in the early days accelerated only very light nuclei, but that one was done to accelerate nitrogen-14. And yes, I think Alex Zucker had a primary role in that. And my understanding, which came about only much later, was that there was fear that a hydrogen bomb might ignite the entire atmosphere of the Earth. So they wanted to get cross sections to see how likely something like that would be.
Thank you for mentioning that. That experiment is still preserved, portions of it, still preserved in Beta 3, a part of the power supply that was used in, that Nick Zerker used, Alex Zerker, right? And he, sorry about that. He did that experiment and proved that in fact the bomb would not ignite the nitrogen in the atmosphere. Other questions or comments?
Jeremy speculated that on the first class.
Okay, if there's not, I'm going to mute everyone again, and that means.
One question here,
Oh,
before
I'm
you
sorry.
leave, thought I was hearing somebody, but I didn't, so I was waiting.
Okay.
It's my ignorance of the physics, but you talk about large magnets. What was the metal or structure of those big magnets in the cyclotrons? Were they wound magnets or were they solid?
Thank you for asking that. Bob, I'll let you talk to the cyclotrons, but I'll talk to the calutrons. The calutrons that were, again, 1,152 of them in Y12, most of them were wound with silver. They borrowed 14,700 tons of silver from the Treasury Department and used that to wind those coils. Now, it's my understanding that Beta 3 was actually copper, and they were never changed out. In 9731, the alpha calutron kept 67 tons of silver until 1970 because they said it was too important. They couldn't shut it down to remove the silver. In 1970, they did. They shut it down, pulled the coils out, removed the silver, sent it back to the Treasury Department, and rewound the coils in copper. So they're wound in copper today. And the two beta calutrons, actually 3 magnets is all that's there, are all copper as well. And the magnets, there are 30 magnets, 30 calutrons on the west racetrack, all copper. And then, of course, the 36 calutrons on the east racetrack are all copper as well. Now, Bob, talk about the cyclotrons. What metal was used, material used for the magnets there? Oh, you'll have to unmute yourself, Bob. Thank you.
I don't think that there were any special changes made for the magnets. My understanding was that the cyclotron was just inserted into the racetrack. I guess maybe one of the calutrons was removed and the cyclotron was put in its place.
Yes, you're exactly right up at Beta 3. In fact, that particular unit is still there. Much of it extends out from the racetrack, but you can still see that cyclotron, the exterior portions of it. Now, the one down in Alpha 2, I think they just moved some of the calutron magnets down there to make that one. I was in there and saw it, and it looked to me like they were just the calutron magnets that had been relocated.
I'm really not familiar very much at all with the one in Alpha 2.
Okay. Other
What
comments?
was the mass flow rate to one of those calutrons?
I'm sorry.
What was the mass flow rate through the calutrons? How much mass did they work on in an hour?
I'm sorry, I'm not understanding your question.
How much mass did it handle in an hour? How much uranium?
Sure. How much material? It was
Yes.
a very, very slow process. They would run those for about 100 hours before they would need to shut them down. And the
Ray, I didn't hear his question either.
he wanted to know how much you could separate, how fast could you separate the uranium, or how much mass could you produce in a calutron. Very slow batch process. They'd run them until the charge box was empty. But again, you're collecting that material up in the top, and they would take that out and get the material out. Very slow process. It took nearly a year to get 60 kilograms, 140 pounds approximately, less than a gallon.
Yeah. Do we know how much the weight, how much material can be put in the charge box at the beginning of the process?
Yes, the charge box is about 3 inches deep, and it's about 6 inches. So it's a cube of 3 by 6 by about 4. It's sort of a rectangular shape. So there's not a lot in that charge box. Now that's a beta. I don't know the alpha charge box, which is one of them up there in beta 3. It's a larger charge box. It's probably about 3 times the size of the betas.
So that's several kilograms or something, maybe like that, or less than 10 pounds?
Right. You're right. It would be just a few kilograms. It'd be more than grams, but not a lot of material.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Ray, my father worked at Y12 in the 50s and 60s, and of course, growing up with him, I never knew any of these details, but he was in most of those Y12 buildings as a chemical operator.
Yeah.
And so I found out the kind of places he worked much later in time when you and others started making that information available.
Yeah. They did not.
He died in 1981, and I never really understood his career very well until more recent years.
Yeah. Most people did not talk a lot about what they were doing. In some cases, they didn't know a lot about it, but in other cases, they did. The chemical operators would have known as much, if not more, than most others, because they would have been actually working with the chemical processes. But again, they were told not to talk about what they were doing. And in fact, even during the Cold War, there was concern that the information should not get out. And so the folks just didn't talk about it.
Ray,
Questions? Yeah.
one of Zucker's cyclotrons ended up in the Smithsonian Institute in their science display. Was it the ones that here at Oak Ridge or at Yale? Do you know?
It was not the one here in Oak Ridge because it's still here. So I don't know. It must have been the other one. Other questions or comments? I'd like to, if it's all right, then I'll mute everyone again. And then I'd like to now just talk a little bit more about the Manhattan Project National Historical Park. And I've got a couple of videos that I think would be of interest to you as well. So let's go do that for just a minute. Now I got to get this up. I'll have to move that. I've got to get it up. All right, it's up. Now, this is a video that introduces the Manhattan Project National Historical Park.
In the early 40s, the world languished under the dark clouds of war. But at last, a ray of hope began to emerge as the United States mobilized to lead the Allies in the greatest war ever. Amid the relentless destruction of war, we also found ourselves in a high-stakes chess match involving strategy, logistics, and technology. To regain ground lost to German engineering, America began pouring massive energy and resources into machines and technology. And in shadowy locations across the US, mysterious work began on what could become the ultimate game changer. A small team of world-class physicists were joined by planners, then by chemists and engineers, then by thousands of craftsmen, women, and laborers, all led by one hard-charging general, and united in a cause that would not be denied. The Manhattan Project, probably the greatest technological endeavor of all time, had begun to take physical form at a secret location in Tennessee called Y-12. The first structure completed, Building 9731, would be the pilot facility for the entire Y-12 plant. Here, we would learn if Nobel Prize winner Ernest Lawrence's concept for separating uranium could work on an industrial scale. Only then might enough be obtained for an actual atomic weapon. The answer was yes. Once proven, the large electromagnetic devices known as calutrons now multiplied from a few prototypes in 9731 to more than 1,100 units in 9 large buildings. Some of the original electromagnets used in the pilot project remain on display today in Building 9731. At a feverish pace, an army of Y-12 workers fought their own secret war. Operating, maintaining, and optimizing efficiency on 1,152 calutrons, they worked round the clock for 18 months. The result of their efforts? A small but sufficient amount of uranium-235. It was the active ingredient of Little Boy, the first of 2, and hopefully the only 2, atomic bombs ever used in warfare. The protracted bloody fighting in the Pacific came to a sudden and most welcome end. Radioisotopes made at Y-12 had helped win the war. But as the war ended, the scientific windfall of radioisotopes had only begun. Their value was immediately recognized in the fields of agriculture, medicine, and material science. The demand skyrocketed, and thanks to Manhattan Project ingenuity, we had both a method and capability to produce them. 2 facilities at Y-12, 9731, and one of the 9 calutron facilities known as Beta 3 were now dedicated to the production of isotopes, primarily for peacetime use. In fact, the Beta 3 calutrons were ultimately used to obtain isotopes of every single element on the periodic table. Now on cold standby, Beta 3 nonetheless remains one of only 2 viable sources in the world for certain isotopes. The other is in Russia. Y-12, its role in World War II, its role in the advent of nuclear technology, its role in the resolution of the Cold War, and its continuing role in promoting peace and progress around the world. All of this forms a fascinating and little-known story. A story with the power to inspire present and future generations. A story perhaps best experienced by a visit to where it all began. In months and years to come, such a visit will be possible thanks to the creation of the new Manhattan Project National Historical Park. As part of the park, buildings 9731 and Beta 3, formerly off limits, will become portals of discovery for inquiring visitors. For more information about the park, visit the National Park website. And to learn more about Y12, visit y12.doe.gov. It'll challenge your preconceptions and energize your imagination.
Okay, the Manhattan Project National Historical Park is, let's see how I can. Located at the Children's Museum. The Visitor Interface Center is located there. And I want to show you a couple of things about the park. Their latest two newsletters, I'll try to get those up. Let's see. Have to do this exactly the same right sequence or I don't get it done. They publish a monthly newsletter. This is the one for October. And notice they were introducing kayaking, join a ranger on a paddle with a ranger. But on October the 24th is going to be the one that's the next one planned that they're advertising. They tried to do one in September and I believe the rain just completely wiped it out. And he also noticed the Manhattan Project themed costume and come to a walk with the ranger on Saturday, October the 31st. A walk through wheat on October the 3rd, which is this coming Saturday at 10. And it talks about what was happening during October during the Manhattan Project. So one other thing that they have is the photography exhibit at the K-25 History Museum in the changing or rotating gallery. There's one there called In the Days of Mud. Now, if I can make this thing work just right, I want to show you okay. Okay. Now, I'm afraid that you will
In the
not.
days of mud, life in Oak Ridge during the Manhattan Project.
I need to know if you're hearing that. And
Yes.
yes, good. Okay, then I'll continue to show it. Thank you for letting me know.
Oak Ridgers during World War II who ventured into Knoxville were easy to spot. The quickly constructed secret city was blanketed in a thick layer of mud. As a result, its residents' muddy shoes were a dead giveaway as to their origin. The muddy conditions of Oak Ridge during the war was a commonality that all residents, regardless of occupation, had to contend with.
I can remember my mother in her white hosiery and her white dress putting on these galoshes up to here. And I thought that was so dignified. The mud, though, was just unbelievable.
Oak Ridge might be dedicated to manufacturing bombs, but dust and mud were the physical elements that went into the actual making of Oak Ridge.
Well, my mom had bought us a pair of galoshes. I can still remember that bus pulling up in East Village. But anyway, that's where the bus pulled in.
We aren't seeing anything. We can hear it, but we can't see
over the
it.
top of my galoshes. So I guess you could say I was awarded a muddy boot when I was only 7 years old.
We had one fella, and he said that he worked in the mud all day, and he came home, went in the dormitory, and took a shower with his clothes on. He said he just liked to do his laundry and his personal bathing at the same time.
Construction was just going on continually. They built 2, 3, 4 houses every day. If you happened to be on one of those streets where a construction was going on, there was a lot of mud. If you moved in on one of the streets that hadn't been finished yet, you were walking in the mud.
Okay, let me. All right. So that exhibit is at the K-25 History Center. And it's a good set of photographs, of course, Ed Westcott photographs. But that History Center should be opening just in a matter of weeks. Just yesterday, I was talking with Alan Lowe, and we were actually doing an interview for an online program that he's producing. I think he's calling it the American Museum of Science and Energy Day. And he was interviewing me as a part of that program. So I asked him, when are you going to open AMSI and K-25 History Center? He said he had just that day, just that morning, sent a communication to the Department of Energy suggesting that the Smithsonian was actually open. All of their facilities are open. Surely Oak Ridge open theirs. So I'm hoping that we'll see that in the very near future, that we'll have access to those two facilities again. Children's Museum is open 3 days a week. National Park is up there. The Oak Ridge History Museum, I believe, will try and open at the same time that K-25 and AMSI does. I have not heard that from them directly, but I'm hoping that they'll be able to do that. They've been doing a lot of renovation inside that museum during this shutdown period. And I went in there just a week ago and did a video for a documentary film that is being produced, and we used that facility. It's looking real good, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to get the public back in there in the real near future. Okay, any questions?
Ray?
Yes.
Yeah, I do. Ray, was there supposed to be any video with that, or was it just the audio? Because we didn't see any video.
Well, that was my fault.
Okay, well, I just didn't know because we just saw whatever was on the screen before.
Well, I'm sorry. I would like you to see that video. If you'll bear with me, I'll make one more attempt to bring it up.
Okay.
I think I know.
Well, we heard the audio.
Well, let me see if I can do it.
If not, it was good 1940s radio.
Yeah.
In the days of mud, life in Oak Ridge during the
Pause it. Now let me try something here. I'm going to get good at this Zoom if it kills me. All right, I'm going to share my screen, and this is the one I'm going to share. Now, Ann, you tell me if you're seeing it.
Okay.
project.
I see nothing.
During
Oh,
World War
yes.
II, who
Yes, I do.
not for easy to spot.
I'm gonna let
The
you watch
quickly
it again if you
constructed
don't hear.
secret city was blanketed in a thick layer of mud. As a result, its residents' muddy
Now,
shoes were a dead
are you
giveaway
still seeing it?
as to their origin.
Yes.
Okay.
The muddy conditions of Oak Ridge during the war was a commonality that all residents, regardless of occupation, had to contend with.
I can remember my mother in her white hosiery and her white dress putting on these galoshes up to here. And I thought that looked so dignified. The mud, though, was just unbelievable.
Oak Ridge might be dedicated to manufacturing bombs, but dust and mud were the physical elements that went into the actual making of Oak Ridge.
Well, my mom had bought us a pair of galoshes. I can still remember that bus pulling up in East Village. But anyway, that's where the bus pulled in, and I remember stepping off the bus and the mud just goes over the top of my galoshes. So I guess you could say I was awarded a muddy boot when I was only 7 years old.
We had one fella, and he said that he worked in the mud all day, and he came home, went in the dormitory, and took a shower with his clothes on. He said he just liked to do his laundry and his personal bathing at the same time.
Construction was just going on continually. They built 2, 3, 4 houses every day. If you happened to be on one of those streets where a construction was going on, there was a lot of mud. If you moved in on one of the streets that hadn't been finished yet, you were walking in the mud.
Okay, I think I got that to where you could see it that time, correct?
Yes,
No.
we could.
Good deal. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions about anything that you'd like me to address? We've got a few more minutes here to wrap up before we finish this session. So what would you like to hear about?
Ray, on the mud, I've seen pictures in Oak Ridge on display someplace that showed a lot of residential streets with the old cars in the 40s and 50s parked in 1.5 foot deep mud. And it was kind of a dramatic pictures I've seen right out in the subdivisions and residential areas with deep mud. Just a comment.
Yeah, I appreciate it. That exhibit that's at the K-25 History Center has most of those Ed Westcott pictures that you've seen. That room is completely full all the way around with large images that feature the mud. You know, they did another one, and it's now in the Oak Ridge History Museum that featured the women of the Manhattan Project, and also one that featured the African-American experience in the Manhattan Project. So the Park Service has created several rotating exhibits for our local museums using Ed Westcott photographs. And once they get those created, they don't destroy them, they keep them and they rotate them around through the museum. So it's a really good service that Park Service is doing for us there.
In the group pictures that you show, everyone is wearing a hat. Was it a requirement to wear a hat?
Back in the 40s, everyone wore a hat, I believe. I actually won a contest at the last year. The Park Service had a dance at the tennis courts, and they asked you to come in costume. I wore a hat. That's all I had is a costume. but it was so much representative of the 1940s that I won the contest for the costume of the 40s. Of course,
I think you'll see hats in fashion up through the 50s. I think the fashion changed around 1960 when John Kennedy was inaugurated. That was a cold inauguration in Washington, and he walked down Pennsylvania Avenue without a hat, and hats went downhill right after that.
I think you're exactly right. You can almost tie it. Well, you can tie it to the fact that President Kennedy did not wear a hat. But you're right. Up until then, everybody had a hat and wore it.
Suits to baseball games and theaters and all that kind of stuff as well. That lasted probably well into the 60s.
Yeah.
But yeah, the hats went away with John.
Yeah.
Ray, somebody asked if you would explain what a racetrack is.
Oh, yes, thank you.
You mentioned that several times.
I see it and appreciate that. The Calutrons were arranged, the first three buildings, Alpha 1, 2, and 3, had the Calutron set in oval shape arrangements. And I'm going to show you that arrangement just in a minute. And I'll explain it then. Now I want to show that one, but this one first. Okay. All right, let me show you this image. Now let me see how I can do this and do it well. Share the screen, show that, share it, and bring it up. Now you see the oval shape of the racetrack, and now the batch processes were between each of those magnets. Down in the lower left, those are the vacuum chambers that fit into those Calutron magnets. But the oval shape that goes around is where it got the title or the term racetrack. Now I want to show you that in the Beta 3 racetrack, you can see it there. Now it is, whoa, I didn't mean to do that. It is rectangular, but they still called it racetrack. In fact, it's just two lines of Calutron magnets with vacuum chambers between each of those magnets. But the term racetrack had already been entrenched in the terminology, so they continued to call them racetracks. Thank you for that question.
There was nothing, true or false, there was no reason to have them connected to one another other than just space savings. It's not that like there was progressive.
Yeah, the space savings.
Progressive.
All of the magnets were tied together electrically. If you look, let me go back. If you look at the top.
But you weren't processing the product from one Calutron to the next Calutron to refine it or anything like that.
That's exactly right. They were batch processes.
They were all discrete batches, and that's some people may not understand what batch processing is. That it's not the product did not pass through each and every Calutron, get passed from one Calutron to the other. They were each their own individual end product.
That's exactly right. Each of these units, there have been 96 Calutrons here, but notice this large ductwork around the top. That's silver bus bars that actually ran the current to all of these magnets. So the magnets were tied together, and the current was going around the racetrack, but not the product. The product was going in at the bottom and out at the top. And each of these 96, see, there were calutrons on the inner circle and on the outer circle. So there would have been 96 batch processes operating here. And then in the control room, you would have had each operator controlling one set of the magnets. Now, I've switched from alphas to betas on you here. This is a beta control room. It's actually in beta 1, but it would have been controlling the racetrack of the beta calutron. I almost had it. Right here. So the control room is over here behind the wall, and then each of their control consoles or cubicles would have been controlling one of these magnets. Again, the material went in the bottom and came out at the top. Now, right over here, there's a door that if you go through that door, there's a cleaning area where you can actually clean. And when they brought the material out, they would clean that out and get, actually that's the door right there, that they would go in and clean the receiving units and actually dissolve the graphite and only have left the uranium. Good questions. Thank you so much for that. Other questions?
Was there a criticality concern in these racetracks?
Actually, no, there was not. There was not enough material at any one place at any one time to have a criticality concern. However, where they were storing the product out of the calutrons did pose a problem. Actually, Richard Feynman, a scientist out at Los Alamos, learned that they were using 55-gallon drums to store material in, and or at least large drums. I don't know what the size was. So he made a trip from Los Alamos to Oak Ridge and said, look, he told Oppenheimer out at Los Alamos, said, those people at Y12 don't understand enough about what they're doing to know that they may produce a criticality if they put enough of that material together. Well, remember, it was taking months to get just a little bit of that material, but they were storing it all in one place. And he came here and told them, said, look, you can't do that. You can't put that much of it in one container, nor can you put the containers close together. And he explained that to them, and they changed the storage approach so that they would not ever approach.
Ray, did they have an almost close incident or a warning or something that happened with regard to that very issue?
Actually, he just learned that they were storing it in one location. And he told Oppenheimer, said, they don't understand that they can't do that. Let me go.
I see.
And he did. Now, you realize that we still didn't realize exactly the significance of that, even up until 1958. On June the 16th, 1958, there was a criticality accident at Y12 where they were storing uranyl nitrate, uranium and nitric acid, in a glass tank. It was a big pipe, really. And they put water in it, drained that uranyl nitrate out, but overnight, that material, one of the valves leaked, and that uranyl nitrate came back into the tank. Being heavier than water, it went to the bottom. So when they opened the valve the next morning, and they were using a 55-gallon drum, they opened the valve the next morning, uranyl nitrate came out first and created a criticality incident because it accumulated enough in the bottom of that barrel to actually cause a criticality. So 8 people were injured as a result of that. Now that incident, that was the first industrial criticality accident, and that produced an enormous amount of education about nuclear criticality. health physics started putting engineered controls in. They no longer allowed 55-gallon drums in the process area. And they restricted anything that could hold enough of it to cause a criticality. They would put holes in it to make sure that it would never collect enough material to cause a criticality. So that did result in a significant amount of education and changing in the processes for criticality safety.
Ray, just a quick
yeah.
Ray, just a quick comment about the racetracks. On a couple of occasions, I had occasion to walk around on the top, and you really needed to be careful where you stepped to try to put your shoes midway between two of the magnet coils, or otherwise the nails in your heels would pull your shoe toward one magnet or the other.
Now that's speaking from practical experience, and you're exactly right. Gladys Owens said that she didn't know what she was doing back then, but she knew that if she had any bobby pins in her hair, they'd just go stick to the wall somewhere. So there was large magnets, and you're exactly right. They were strong enough. I heard the story about one person who got close enough to them that his pocket knife stuck up against a magnet. And when that happened, they didn't cut the magnets off. They cut his pocket to get that knife out of his pocket. So they were strong enough that they would pull the nails of your shoes, would pull, and you'd have a hard time stepping up. Okay.
How did they restart the machines after a power interruption?
Well, the machines would start without any problem. You just run current through the magnets. The idea was it was taking so long to get that material that they didn't want to shut them down. Once they got them operated and got them going, they wanted to keep them running 24 hours a day again, because they thought they were in a race with Germany and they were trying to get that material as quickly as they could. Okay, we've run up on our end of the time. Is there any final comments or questions? I just want you to know how much I appreciate you all participating in these sessions, and your inputs and your questions have been delightful to be engaged with you. I will also
Thank you, Ray.
Thank you. I will promote the upcoming fall and winter series. They've asked me to do this again. So we will have another more stories of the Secret City coming up in the next ORICL session. Thank you all.
That's super. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.